The other point, and this article goes on, goes on and on and on, and it talks about a number of reasons and why it might be that there's such a gap between the mandate and the days in the office. Like, how do you even know? Right? HR is busy doing other things. You really think they're going to track down people who are in the office? And how do you distinguish somebody who's not in the office because they're working from home versus they're traveling versus they're sick? Are they really going to do that on a day-to-day basis? Right? These are some of the downstream impacts that you really have to think about when you're thinking about change. But the other interesting data point is that companies that require 1 day a week essentially get complete compliance. Okay, everybody comes in 1 day a week. Companies that are mandating three or more, compliance now is below 75%, which is up a little bit from 67% last year, but it's nowhere near, right? Think about a quarter of your workforce not showing up when you, the boss, has mandated this. Right? It's an interesting dilemma. Okay, um, sorry. So let's talk about one of the topics is uh, change, innovation. Innovation obviously is a form of change, right? Changes how we do our work. Um, has to diffuse through the organization. And there are three groups of factors that influence the diffusion of change or the diffusion of innovation. The first is the attributes of the innovation itself. So these are the perceptions of that change within the organization. Does it offer an advantage? Can I see it? Can I try it? Is it easy to use? And does it fit in my current workflow? Right? Because the more times you say no, 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 the lower that threshold becomes, right? That it's not the attributes aren't that hot if you're saying no. The second is the characteristics of individuals within the organization, and that includes us, right? What's our credibility as the change agent? Um, how does the organization make decisions, right? This may bleed into this managerial factor, but is the change or is the innovation going to be optional? Do we all have to do it? Or is it going to look like the last slide where the highest paid person says we're going to do this, and the expectation is that we all follow suit and do it. And then the bit that's also on us is communication, right? How do we communicate? How frequently do communicate? What avenues, what channels are we using to communicate? When is it appropriate for like mass blast, right? Email blast. Um, and when do we have to have interpersonal, one-on-one or group kinds of discussions? And then the last bit is uh, organizational factors. So what's the culture of the organization? Does it have a tolerance for risk? Does it have a culture of experimentation? Or is it more conservative, more let's stick with the tried and true, risk averse? What are the norms of behavior, right? Companies will often say, um, we celebrate failure once. If you fail more than once, we don't celebrate that, we fire you, right? That's not a culture that will foster um, transformational kinds of changes. And what are the social networks within an organization? And I don't want to say more about that right now because we're going to talk about that in a few slides. But these are all the factors that are associated with the diffusion of an innovation or the diffusion of change more generally. Now, uh, there's there's a very interesting interview with Satya Nadella last week, coinciding with Trump's visit to the UK. Microsoft and NVIDIA announced major investments in the UK. So Microsoft announced, as you can see on this, a $30 billion investment in the UK. And he expects to see that this is going to drive growth GDP growth, and productivity. And he makes a very important point about why things take time. So it's only about a minute. I want to play it for you. So bear with me 1 second. Sorry, this is not a YouTube, so I couldn't embed it.
The UK economy is pretty sluggish at the moment, I think it's fair to say. When do you think AI is going to deliver this promised 10% growth boost that we're supposed to be getting?
Always, whenever anyone gets excited about AI, I want to see it ultimately in the economic growth and in the GDP growth.
So could we say in 10 years?
Well, I mean, you can never predict. So the point is, since it all is compounding, right? So the ability for AI perhaps to benefit from even the investments everyone made, even on the cloud, it may happen faster. So our hope is not 10 years, but maybe 5 years. But it does take time. I think there's no shortcutting the time for diffusion. And also change. Let's not ignore the fact that organizations also have to go through the hard process of how to change the processes that adjust to these new levels of productivity.
Is there a danger that the UK is
Okay,
giving
that's
up
all we needed to hear, right? So those two elements, it's diffusion, but related to that diffusion is people use technology. Technology doesn't implement itself. So having AI models, AI technology is great, but unless people have been brought through the process and see the benefit and have the ability, have been trained, have practiced, have tried it to use AI, you're not going to see the benefit of it, right? It becomes a technology investment. Okay, let's go back to our slides. Sorry. All right. Yep. So, you know what? I don't want to do that here. I don't know how that got here. That's not what I want to do right now. I'll come back to that. I want to share with you because your breakout from last week is related to what we just talked about, the diffusion of an innovation and Nadella's point about the diffusion of innovation. And so what I did, and thank you all for submitting to the Google form. We were three groups, and so these are just going to break down by question, right? What were the drivers of change? Each one of you said in some order, technology opportunity, which is interesting, right? So and I'll come back to that in a minute. Efficiency and cost savings, that's what HR thought. I'm not sure about market and environmental changes. Maybe that's related to technology opportunities. Efficiency and cost savings, regulatory and compliance requirements, right? That the legal and regulatory people were sort of doing that watchful wait to see what was happening. There's no doubt that technology opportunities exist now that didn't exist. The way I would think about this personally is that's not the driver of change. Just because there is a new technology doesn't provide the rationale for people to use it. Remember, the very first step in readiness is the discrepancy between where we are and where we need to be. And that very rarely is just get this technology and that will bridge the gap. So the way I think about it is the driver could very well be efficiency and cost savings, or efficiency, cost savings, and legal regulatory issues. And they are enabled by technology. That's fundamentally different than if we deploy this technology, we will drive cost savings. What is the real driver? Cost savings, regulatory, not technology, right? Everybody got, it was top down. It was clearly top down. Stakeholder receptivity, yeah, HR was certainly supportive, and I basically gave you that. Legal and compliance, that was a hard one because I didn't give you any information, right? So all I did was say they were sort of watching. Did that make them neutral? Did that make them quietly supportive? And that may sound like, oh, that was a subtle slicing of the salami there. I'll show you an example of that in a little while. Managers Neutral to resistant, yeah, I would say that's about right. Maybe leaning to the resistant side. Will I lose power? Will I lose control over how I manage my people, how I rate the performance of my people? And everybody got employees were resistant, right? It's the fear of AI, which is why you saw the breakout slide before this, because we're going to talk a little bit about how do you overcome that level of resistance. Group two talked about the board of directors, and it's not uncommon to see people say, oh, the board of directors is a stakeholder. At the start, remember, stakeholder management is very situational and it's at the time of that circumstance, right? So at the beginning of this, where the company is thinking about deploying AI, the board of directors is not a stakeholder. They wouldn't even be aware of it at this point. If the company said we're going to fundamentally change how we manage performance, how we promote people, how we pay people, yeah, at that point, the board to some degree would get involved. But even then, it's probably more likely to stay at the level of that one at the level of the executive team. Last question was about stakeholder assessment. And everybody got piloting, testing, and feedback, right? Two groups did surveys and pulse checks, and one group did the trifecta of piloting, surveys, and focus groups and interviews. The only thing I'll say, pilot and testing is great, right? And we're going to see this next week when you're going to talk about, running pilots or running experiments. You've got to get people to the point though where they're willing to try it. Obviously, they can't run a pilot if they say, I'm not doing that. So how do you get their buy-in before you're even able to run a pilot? And then the feedback is related to the results of the pilot. That's where these surveys, pulse checks, group focus groups, and interviews become really important, right? So that's the subtlety of sequencing activities, right? So you would do surveys and pulse checks first, broad, right? See where people are. You do focus groups and interviews to see, at a lower level, let me understand what's driving managers or what's driving HR or something like that. And then when you got everybody sort of at that stage of you've piqued their interest, they like it. Now they want to understand, how can I try it? That's where you would run a pilot and you would generate a quick win and you would collect feedback and then you would build on that. You'd start to build momentum. That's what we'll talk about that next week. But thank you. This was great. You did a great job of sort of getting the landscape right. All right. So risk of going backward just for a minute. These attributes of innovation, these become critically important, right? So even though I just said technology enables it, technology is not the change, the attributes of the technology, the attributes of the innovation, whatever that is important. And so that's these 5 aspects right here, right? So what's the relative advantage of what we're proposing? Does it make my life easier? Does it make it more convenient? Does it improve our legal compliance? Things like that. Is it consistent with the values and the culture of the organization, right? And the needs of the people who have to adopt it? I already mentioned this is self-explanatory. Is it easy to understand or easy to use, or does it come, is it like an iPhone that comes with no user manual? Or is it like a supercomputer where you've got tomes of documentation that you have to work your way through? Can I try it? Can I run that pilot? Can I run that pilot? Right? Trialability. And can I see the results? Are they visible? Are they meaningful? Are they material to the company? These 5 things account somewhere between 50 and 90% in the variation in the rate of diffusion, not whether it diffuses or not, but how quickly it diffuses. Yeah, clear? Okay, so diffusion, right? And you heard Nadella talk about diffusion. The need for diffusion. I said it at least 4 or 5 times already. Diffusion of innovation follows a bell-shaped curve, right? So this is the so-called Bass model of diffusion. And you've got the innovators themselves, so the person who is the leading the change or the person who is the innovator, the discoverer of the inventor of the innovation. You've got the early adopters, right? Think about these as the people who are lining up midnight at Grand Central Station the night before a new iPhone is released so that they can be the first people to get a new iPhone or new AirPods or whatever the case may be. Then you get the early majority, right? So this is about a third of the population is the early majority. And then the late majority, and these are the people who still own flip phones, right? They're the laggards, right? The Luddites. They're not going to adopt the technology, or they'll be the very last people to adopt the technology. Now, before I ask you these questions, the tipping point for whether this is whatever the innovation is actually going to gain enough traction to diffuse is at this interface between the early adopters and the early majority. And it's not because you have 13.5% of the people who have adopted it. It's related to something else. So I'm not going to give you the answer right now. We're going to sort of probe that together. But when you think about these different segments, who do you think are the likely candidate, is the likely or are the likely ones to be proactive about the change? What do you think? Who's going to be most proactive? How about left side or right side of the curve? Left, left. Yes, yes. Thank you. You can actually talk to me. I won't promise I won't bite. You can actually say it out loud. The left side, yes. Specifically, the early adopters, right? Since these are the inventors, the early adopters are the people who are change proactive. And then conversely, the laggards are the ones who are going to be resistant, right? So now I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the person who is trying to lead this kind of change. Where do you think you'd focus first? On the left side or the right side? Scroll down, try to scroll down without changing the slide. So you have your chat box open on the bottom of my screen here. What do you think? Where would you focus first? On the people who want to do it or the people who don't want to do it?
I think you would want to focus on the people in the middle who are persuadable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephanie. So I assume you mean here the early majority?
And maybe the late majority, because if you don't have them, then that holds back the entire organization.
Yeah. So the reason why this is the tipping point is because these people aren't persuaded to do it based on what you're doing. They're persuaded to do it based on the people they know who are the early adopters, right? So they are influenced by the early majority is influenced by the early adopters. The late majority is influenced by the early majority, right? That's the notion of those social networks, right? The connection between people. I know you, I trust you, and if you're doing it, I'll give it a try. I'll try it, right? So you'll focus in this space to get enough people on board that you've got that critical mass of connections to pull the other people to the left, right? The other people that you can persuade. Good. How are you going to deal with people who are resistant? At the beginning, you're not, right? It gets when the process, when you're starting to build this amount of momentum, at some point you do have to deal with the laggards, because what you don't want is, if these people are well connected, you don't want them pulling people to the right. So this is where you would use more institutional levers to say, you either have to get on board with this, or you need to find a new role, you need to find new opportunities elsewhere. And you, at that point, you need to have enough credibility and enough political support to be able to do that, or somebody has to do it for you. But at some point, the laggards have to be dealt with. How do you, oh, by the way, there's the, the propensity to adopt is highest as you move to the left. It's the propensity to resist is highest as you move to the right. How would you categorize these individuals? How do you know? I don't have a label on my forehead that says early majority, early adopter, late majority. And I'm not going to whip out my phone to see, wait, does he have a flip phone? No, he doesn't. He has an iPhone 16. So I'm not over here, but how do you know where I am over here? And it's a little bit better than guessing. You would see how I respond to other kinds of innovation, or how I talk about innovations. Am I a proponent of them? Do I use technology? If it's a technology change, do I use it on a regular basis? If it's an organizational change, how did I react, or how did I act in those previous change scenarios? Was I supportive? Was I resistant? Was I active about it? Did I just go for the ride? That helps you figure out where people are, right? And then I'm gonna ask you this on a poll, but I want to ask you a different question first. So if you think about that, and just in case this is too small for you to see, this is an org chart, and this is a social network map. How do you think change happens? Yeah, I don't know if that's one of you or how many of you there are now. Let me see. Or 10 of you. There are 10 of you now. I don't know what that number is, because I see the same thing you see 100%. Change is very much a social activity, right? And this is how we're organized, who reports to whom. This is how work gets done. And that's why so many organizations are moving so many enterprises, I don't want to use the word organization twice, so many enterprises are moving away from, we're organized by functional discipline, to we're organized by deliverables, by products, by getting specific things done. Because this is how work gets done. Hey, this is how work gets done, and this is how change happens. Right? So that kind of begs the question, if I can change slides, is how would you use analytics then to try to accelerate the diffusion of change? What would you analyze? Beyond what I just said about, well, you'd see how I did in previous change efforts. Just as a follow-up to this slide, right? How would you use analytics? Any wild guesses? This sorry. This is easy to know because all you do is look at an org chart and you say, oh, Stephanie reports to David, Jesse reports to he. You know that. How do you know the bottom? You have to map the networks. You do social network analytics, right? And you would either do it by email, tracking email, who's connected to whom, who's works with whom, right? You would actually map people together to understand who's connected to whom within a group, who's connected to whom across groups. So you would actually use network analytics, social network analytics, network mapping analytics to actually understand who's connected to whom. And then you would combine that with who are the early adopters, and you would use them as levers of influence around others. Yeah. And you would target your communication then appropriately. That's exactly right. You would do that. Right. Yeah. Okay. You got it. You got it now. All right. So here's what network analysis looks like, right? So you find out in this group, in this diagram, you've got two groups, right? The red group and the blue group. You actually have four groups. And you have a green person and a purple person. They're solo people, right? So within a group, you know that this person, Kay Erickson, is very well connected within his or her group. And you know that T. Christensen is actually connected with other blue people in the blue group, but he or she is also connected to people in the red group and the purple and green groups, right? So that notion earlier about silos, breaking down silos, understanding these nodes, these people who are quote unquote nodes and connect across groups is really important because they're trusted by these other groups, not just by their own group, but by these other groups. And this shows you the same exact thing, right? And you have to figure out, how do I reach these people out here who must be the most introverted, isolated people on the face of the earth because they're not interacting with anybody, right? But the real importance of this is this quote. It's from Meg Wheatley, who's an author, a business author. Right? To become effective at change, we must lead behind the imaginary organization we design, the org chart, and learn to work with the real organization, networks, which have interdependent relationships, right? So we're working with a social phenomenon, webs of relations, right? We're not widgets. We are what called complex adaptive organizations, organisms. We have connections with other people, and there's no direct cause and effect relationship, right? So we need to understand how people work together, who's connected to whom, right? And within who's connected to whom, who's accepting or proactive of change, and who's resistant to change, so that we can do something about it. Do something about it to help advance the change that we're trying to progress. Yeah. Now, there are fundamentally two different types of networks, what are called fireworks displays of networks. And it's because of that view of like a firework in the sky. It explodes in thousands of different directions. Well, think about your LinkedIn network. You don't know everybody you're connected to on LinkedIn, right? Unless you're very, very selective about, no, I'm not going to accept that. Unless I know that person. You've got way more connections than people you know. But these are called weak ties, right? You may know their name, you may know where they work, but not much beyond that. Or if they publish, you know what they publish. The flip is, again, descriptive, a fishing net type of a network. And it's because it's very tight, right? Like a fishing net is very tight. It's a smaller number. But these are strong ties. These are people you know, right? These are people that if you might go out to dinner with them, or if you need a babysitter for a weekend, they might watch your kids for the weekend, or they might borrow your car. You get the idea, right? These are people you know really, really well, and you trust their judgment, right? So two types of networks. Which type of network do you think is most effective about just getting the word out there, spreading the information? I want to get the information out there as fast and as broadly as I can, as quickly and as broadly as I can. Yeah, it's A, right? I want to blast it, right? I want to blast something out there to as many people as possible. I'm going to see who's connected to whom. I don't care how they're connected. I'm just going to use that information and blast that mass communication out there, right? What type of network is more effective at facilitating change? By far, the fishing net type of a network, because you look for what's called social proof. I want to see what other people whom I trust, whom I respect, what are they doing? Right? Um, I promised that I wasn't going to go back to COVID multiple times, but I have to go back to COVID one more time here. When the guidance from the government was, wear a mask, no, wait, don't wear a mask, no, wait, wear a mask, we're only kidding. And people lost complete trust in the government, which meant that the government giving guidance on being vaccinated wasn't going to work. They could give you facts, right? Here are the facts around COVID vaccines. But they needed to find trusted sources of information to convince, influence, and persuade people to be vaccinated. That's why local government officials, pastors, principals of schools, primary care physicians were the ones who became the advocates for vaccination, because those were the people that were trusted within their community or their group. Right? It wasn't this blast out of vaccines or safe vaccines are effective. It was, do I trust the messenger? Right? That's the key point. Do I trust the messenger? So here's how you then would think about leveraging those social networks specifically, because right, it's all built to the whole point about why you would do network analysis, and then how would you leverage it. So you've got to be able to overcome resistance, right? And you could either try to fight it out, or you can figure out, how do I leverage other people? And that's why I said, if you have enough credibility, maybe you do this yourself. If you don't, you've got to figure out who's going to help you, not do it for you. I shouldn't have said that. Who's going to help you? And that's where you need to understand these connections. Because if somebody is out here, right, on the right side of the curve, if you've identified the early adopters or the early majority even who are connected to them, you can leverage their influence, their relationship with the people on the right side of that curve to pull them over and make them adopters. Right? So it essentially broadens your influence, right? Because even though you may have the best intentions in mind, you're not as believable as somebody who is actually doing it at the ground level in the organization. Right? You're a biased voice, right? You're pushing for this change. You're advocating for the change. And those are these social organizational factors that become so important. Now, there's an interesting study about this notion of a penalty associated with AI usage. right? And here was the circumstance. Here was the scenario that senior leader in engineering rolled out an AI coding assistant, and with the intent of increasing efficiency of developers, right? They presumably did all the communication, laid out the case, made sense. First year, only 41% of the engineers even tried it. Of the engineers, among female engineers, 31%. So there was some reluctance, some resistance to even trying it after it was rolled out. And it begs the question of why is that? So they ran a very interesting experiment, and they got reviewers to evaluate a piece of code or a snippet of code that was purportedly written by another engineer, either alone, independently, or with assistance from AI. When those reviewers thought that AI was being used to augment the engineer, they rated the competence of that engineer lower. Right? And the raters, if the raters themselves happened to be non-adopters, they were even harsher in the penalty that they associated with AI usage. Right? So 9% lower, females 13% lower, double the penalty for males. Right? So this is that social identity, right? So you got a stereotyped group, women in a technology industry, male dominated industry, just reinforcing the doubts about their competence. So what do you do about that? How do you address that? Take that as a rhetorical question. So you've got to use social influence. You've got to flip the equation and use social influence to combat the social penalty that's being imposed. And so the way to do that is to find visible and respected role models, meaning senior women in the organization who role model the use of AI. So you want that champion to mirror the demographics that are being penalized. Right? And so for women in senior roles, they didn't carry that same fear of, are they going to question my competence? They earned their competence, right? And same idea. You leverage them to say, look, it's safe. You can do this, right? And I'm going to help you do it and do it with you. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about just two more things, and then I'm going to give you a break. And then I'm going to figure out where to put that slide for the breakout group, because when we come back from the break, we're going to do the breakout. The last part that I want to talk about in that model of here are the factors, here are the 5 factors that determine the diffusion of innovation. Contextual factors become really, really important as well, right? It's not just the innovation per se, it's the organizational factors, right? So organizations can be nurturing, right? And they could praise them, offer resources, even have formal processes that companies have formal processes to celebrate failures. And it's not that they like to fail. The question is, what did they learn from that failure, right? And they celebrate that learning. Or they could create a culture that says, don't rock the boat. And if you try to rock the boat, you try to introduce too much, you're a troublemaker. Right? You need to understand that, not so much to say, I'm never going to introduce a change, but to inform how you introduce the change, right? Because if the organization is so tightly bolted down that there's only one way to do things, and that's the only way it's the way that it's only ever been done, maybe that's not such a great place to work for the long term, right? And then here's that notion of social exchanges, right? Silos versus social socially connected organizations, right? So that people can learn from each other and model behavior based on behavior of people they know, they trust, they respect, right? Okay, what I want you to do is I'm going to put this link. I want you to do this. It's a couple questions. It's a short question, and it's an actual research project. So let me copy this and put it in the chat box. Bear with me. And it's more for your own edification than anything, to understand what your own perceptions are about change, right? Because it's much like self-awareness. I mean, much like emotional intelligence. You have to have a level of self-awareness before you can understand the emotions of others. Well, you need to have an understanding of how you approach change so that you can help lead other people through change. And this is particularly important, by the way, when we think about how do we respond to resistance from others. So take them probably 2 minutes, 3 minutes at most. By the way, this is an active research. This is a validated study, and it's an active research program. So it's got real meaningful results in it. And the next slide is just a survey to say, my resistance change is above average, average, below average, and that's all we're going to share. And obviously we don't know Sue. We just know 100% above, 100% below, some response. It's in the link, Ashley. It's in the chat. So it should be right above what you just chatted to me. Okay. Tell you what, while you're doing that, why don't we take a break? So that should take that'll be motivation. I'll even give you 2 minutes extra. So take a 7-minute break at 7 o'clock. Let's reconvene at 7:07. We'll share our results and then we'll move on from there. So come on back. All right. So if you're able to, please turn your cameras back on. All right. So what, 25% above average resistance, 75% average resistance, right? Not surprising. Below average, I assume we don't have any thrill seekers and skydivers and things like that. Oh, I guess we do have 1 or 2 thrill seekers, skydivers, people like that in there. Interesting. So pretty much a normal kind of distribution of resistance change. And I'll show you why that's relevant as opposed to talking to it. Let me just go through a few slides and it'll start to explain why it's even important to know your own inclinations around change, your own proclivity around resistance to change. So there are a couple ways of thinking about resistance. One is to personalize it, right? Where I'm trying to do the right thing and you're getting in my way. And that's where, you use those labels like you're resistant, you are resistant, you are opposing what I'm trying to do. You can think about it as the relationship between the resistance being a measure of relationship between the agents and the recipients, where the change agent is the active participant, and the resistors are pushing back against that. And you can even think about it as being a positive contribution. Think about that. How could you possibly think about somebody who's opposing what you want to do as making a positive contribution? Right? And that's what we're going to explore, is because this is the most productive way of thinking about resistance, right? That there's a message in there, right? They're telling us something. So let's look at it, right? So in 2 broad schools of thinking for resistance, one is psychological and one is systems, right? So psychological, needless to say, is about people, right? That people themselves are the source of resistance and it becomes us versus them. And my goal as us is to overcome them. Systems is there's something going on in the broader organization, right? The context in the broader organization. And there's something about that that's just constraining it. And if I can just channel those feelings of resistance constructively, I can use it. I can use it to my advantage. I can use it to the organization. I don't mean that in a negative way, my advantage to the advantage of the organization, right? And so if depending upon whether you think about the psychological concept or that systems concept, it fundamentally shapes how you perceive and respond to the behaviors that we're labeling as resistance, right? So on the psychological side, resistance is the enemy, and therefore I have to overcome it. On the system side, resistance is feedback. People are uncomfortable about something, right? They're anxious about something, and I need to understand it. Right? Fundamentally different, right? You can see where this is conflictual. This is more starts to lay the groundwork for collaboration, right? This is expressed as opposition, infighting, defiance, refusal, rejection, outright rejection of what I'm trying to do. If I personalize it, the same behavior could be interpreted differently as you're doubting what I'm saying, that you have concerns about what I'm saying, or you're arguing, or you're ambivalent, or you're just questioning what I'm trying to do. That's fundamentally different, right? Conflictual to having you're uncomfortable with what I'm doing. Let's try to understand that more. So that brings you to the goal. The goal on the personalized side is to stop it, right? Stop the change plan, get in the way. The goal on the system side is to understand it better, or to be able to influence it, have an impact on the change effort. Right? Now that one's easy to address, right? And we'll start to look at that a little bit. I think that's pretty much says the same thing. So the point is, though, that focusing just on the behavior itself isn't productive. It isn't productive for a couple of reasons. One is it sets up the conflict of personalizing it. Another is, as it says below that, it becomes self-fulfilling. I'm trying to do the right thing. It didn't work, and it's because of you, right? You got in the way. The other is that if you're focusing only on what you observe as the behavior, you don't understand why. You don't understand what's driving it. And you can't do anything about it until you understand why. Right? Much like stakeholder management. And this is a form of stakeholder management. You have to understand what's in it for the other person in order to be able to position what you're trying to do or get their input into what you're trying to do, right? That becomes critically important, right? So the behavior itself doesn't help. You've got to be able to get to the why. And you did this for me in a poll when I asked, so think about a situation where you were facing a change, and you were faced with a change and you had some reservations about it. What drove the reservations? Well, here's some very common reasons for change resistance. I'm not going to read it to you, but I want you to look at this and see if you can relate to any of these in the context of a circumstance that you are facing. I can, personally, I can. And right up here is this disrupted social network. I like working with, I like the people I work with. I like working with them, right? It becomes disrupted. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's think about then, let's talk about these models of change resistance. So when you're faced with a change, it elicits a couple of aspects. One is, how do I think about it? The other is, how do I feel about it? And then, what am I going to do? Am I actually going to do anything? or am I not even going to, not going to do it? Just like the mandate back to the office. Nope, not going to do it. Right? So these three things get integrated. How we think, how we feel, and how we act. How we act is the result of how we think and how we feel. Right? So that led to this somewhat academic model of this with circle, right? 4x2 wasn't good enough. This is a circumflex where you can think about, do I feel positively? Valence is, do I feel positive about it? Or do I feel negative about it? And how active am I? Am I actively involved or am I passive? Just going to watch it play out, see what happens. Right? So we need to now understand what drives whether I'm positive and highly activated, negative and highly activated, and the flip, positive and passive, low, negative and passive. What drives that? Right? Because it's situational. There's nothing that would say I'm always positive, no matter what anybody tells you. I'm always positive about everything and I'm always active in it. No, not the case, right? So how do we think about that? So let's talk about the thinking part first, right? The first part is, what's the relevance of the change? Now, that's the relevance to me individually, and by extension to the organization, right? That notion of agency. I am part of the organization, right? I identify with the organization. So if it's good for the organization, there's a chance that it's good for me from a goals perspective. What about the direct relevance to me, right? Does it impact me directly? Does it impact my degree of personal involvement in the effort? Right? And that determines whether I'm active or passive, less active about it. Right? So if I perceive it as being aligned with the broader goals, I'm positive. I'm already on the right side. If I perceive it as, no, that's misaligned, right? I see the gap, but what you're proposing doesn't make sense. It doesn't address the situation. I'm going to feel negatively about it. I don't agree with it. I feel negative about it. If it has a direct impact on me and I have some degree of control over it, I'm highly activated. If it doesn't affect me or I can't cope with it, I have a low activation. I'm passive about it, right? And that's what this says here. So when I'm highly activated, if I'm positive, that expresses itself as I'm enthusiastic about this, right? I'm over the moon about this opportunity. If I'm highly active and negative, that could be anger, that could be annoyance, that could be combative behaviors, right? And if you flip the low activation, if I really can't control it, then but I'm positive about it and I can't be involved in it, it may show up as I appear relaxed or I appear contented. If I'm negative about it and I'm low, I may appear sad. I may appear helpless. This is where, oh, let me just go to the next slide and show you. So let's just, before I tell you how that behavior plays itself out, right? So positive and highly activated, aligned with goals, relevant to me, and I can cope with it and I can get involved in it. I want to get involved in it, right? I'm positive and highly activated, upper right-hand quadrant. The flip, low goal alignment, I don't like it. It's going to impact me, but I can do something about it. I'm going to be active and negative, and that's the behavior of change resistance, right? This going down now, this change disengagement is, I'm negative about it, but it's not really going to affect me directly, and I don't really need to get involved in it. That's where this notion of sad, helplessness, this is where absenteeism can come into play, right? All of a sudden, I'm phoning it in. I'm not giving it my best. I'll come in late, I'll leave early, I'll take a long lunch, I'm reading the newspaper at my desk, things like that. And then change accepting, calm, relaxed, content. It's aligned with my goals, aligned with the broader goals and my goals, so I'm positive. But it's not really going to impact me directly, and I really don't have much of a role to play in it. I'll just watch it go by. Yeah, clear? All right. So how do you influence these? Now, this is the real breakout. The other slide, by the way, that I mixed up was the introduction to the breakout you did last week, which is why I don't want to do that again. We already did that. It was an introduction. So again, this is a real study, right? Pew Research study. 52% of is about AI and the future of work. 52% reported feeling worried about the impact of AI in the workplace. 33% they felt overwhelmed compared to 36% who said they were hopeful. Right? So if we go back, somewhere the overwhelmed, somewhere on this side, the hopeful, somewhere over here on the right side, right? Just negative versus positive. All of them appear to be like below this line of activation, right? Being hopeful is not exactly an active verb. Being overwhelmed is not exactly active. But the real important thing is that one of the major reasons that employees don't trust AI is that they see the tools as lacking in benevolence in how they make recommendations and decisions. There is no benevolence in AI making actions, making recommendations and decisions. And therefore, they worry about whether AI will care and take into account the employee's interests in recommendations to the organization, right? It's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable at all. So that's the technology related, right? I'm worried about the technology because it has no feelings. It's purely objective. It doesn't care how I feel about it. This sentiment up here also relates to how workers feel about their leadership, the organization, human leadership, organizational leadership, and how they think that leaders will use tools, and they're worried about their faith in leaders' motivations in using these tools. Think about the breakout from last week. The managers were worried about how the organization would use AI. Will it undermine their ability to manage their own employees? So the punchline is that employees want to know whether adopting AI will promote their interests, both from a technology perspective and an authoritarian perspective, or lead to their dismissal, right? So will it augment them or will it replace them? So the question is, before I set you free, here's the scenario. Your organization is implementing it, and now they want your guidance on how to lead change so that employees will actually adopt it as a new way of working, right? And so you give this high level kind of anodyne response of, well, what you need to do is build their trust in technology and their trust in you as leaders. But they want more. So how would you be more specific? Right? So let me see how many you are. I'm just gonna take a couple minutes and do two groups. There are 11 of you. So just spend 10 minutes and just brainstorm. You don't have to debate these. Brainstorm what could you do to help people help address, let me go backward if I can. Maybe I can't. If you want to take a screenshot, take a screenshot. How would you build trust that in the technology per se? And how would you build trust in the way leaders, what could leaders do to assuage the fears of employees that their interests will be taken into account? Okay, so take a screenshot and then just brainstorm it, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll just do a couple bullet points and I'll share a couple of my bullet points. So bear with me 1 minute while I do the breakout rooms. I'm going to do 2 breakout rooms. You're signed automatically. 10 minutes. So all you have to do is accept the invitation. Back. I think we have everybody back. All right. So, group 1, just one thing you did to build trust in AI, and one thing you did to build that would build trust in leadership.
I think
Okay.
I was in group 1. I'm not
Yep,
100%
I think
sure.
that's right. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So, some things that we talked about. One thing for the AI level, or it actually goes into both, but I guess for AI and the leadership level is just like having transparency, using. I'll actually say it for the employee part. So like having transparency and communicating with your employees is really important. Making sure they know it's like for the better and not like for like to replace their jobs or anything.
Very good.
And then for AI, something we talked about was like having kind of like regulation, being able to like audit the system and make sure that like, there are safeguards in place. Like that also builds trust, and that is also a level of transparency, like having it be maybe like open sourced or something would help employees feel better as well.
Excellent. Exactly. That's it. They're both exactly right. And when you said transparency on both sides, that's exactly right. Very good. Hajra, right? That's how you pronounce your name? Hajra?
Yes, Hadra.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Hajra. Thank you, group 1. Group 2. Go ahead, Alima. Is that how
Um,
you pronounce Alima?
yeah, Alima,
Okay.
that's right. So I think we agree with the group 1. I agree with Hadra. That first thing you have to do is to build the trust, but also we're thinking that we also can show the early adopters and champions. So basically those clusters of people who already implemented those changes, and maybe they can show by their example that those changes actually can bring good results, like in benefits for the company and for the teams overall. So this is what we think can be implemented from the leadership perspective. When it comes to AI perspective, we actually, one of the ideas is first that we can implement it into like security processes, for example, and the strong security can protect like sensitive data, and we can also integrate AI smoothly with existing tools, so people don't need to like switch systems, for example. And another thing is that as that might not be necessarily directly related to all of them, but since AI helps to optimize the processes and make everything much faster, it will create higher profits for the company and potential benefits for the employees. So yeah, that's it from our group. Thank
Good.
you.
Good. Thank you, Alima. Thank you, group 2. Yeah. Excellent. Again, you're exactly on the right track. So let me show you just again, this is what I thought. This doesn't make it the only thing. It doesn't make it the right thing. But to build trust in AI, start with some facts, or if you don't start with it, provide some facts. Here's the reliability of it. Here's the accuracy of it. Create transparency. Let people see it, right? If it's open source, let them actually manipulate it, play with it. Try to make it as explainable as possible. Group 1, you talked about this, auditing. Audit the accuracy. Make sure that you're mitigating any risks of bias or performance tracking. At the leadership level, talk to people, right? Get people in discussions about AI and how that could impact their work and address their concerns transparently and honestly. And then develop literacy programs, AI literacy programs, help them feel less threatened by adoption. Because what you're trying to do is you're not so much trying to get them to accept it blindly. You're trying to make them aware, make them comfortable at both levels. They've got to be able to trust their manager before they can trust their technology, because they have to be able to trust that even if they don't believe the benevolence of AI, they have to trust that their manager is going to use it in a benevolent way. We're humans. At the end of the day, you've got to make that connection. Excellent. Thank you for doing that. That was great. So here are the implications, the broader implicate, not just the breakout, but the broader implications of what we talked about with that circumflex model. The more we as change agents are aware of and care about two things, aware of what change recipients feel and or interest and care about them, the more likely we are to construct change events that are aligned with other people's goals and interests. Logical, right? We have to know what their goals and interests are before we can begin to align what we're doing with their goals and their interests. Make sure that the perception and the reality that the recipient's interests are accounted for is influenced by their ability to participate. So involve people, right? What better way is there to say your interests are being accounted for than to say, I'd like you to be involved in this? Now, you can't involve everybody in the organization, so be selective about this, but that's another one. Create that sense of agency, right? So factors that increase the identification of a change recipient with the organization, right? I believe in the purpose of this organization. It increases their appraisal, their assessment of goal relevance. It's relevant to the organization. I'm part of the organization, therefore it's relevant to me. And give them a sense of control, because that helps with their coping potential, right? I'm not a victim. I have some say in what's going on, right? It's a social phenomenon, right? Change is a very social activity. And that's why we do change audits, right? So that you understand where people are in their journey of receptivity and commitment, and you can match your approach to their level so that you're reducing the risk of conflict. You're not eliminating it, you're reducing the risk of conflict at the beginning, because you're pacing and positioning the change in a way that's relevant to the people in the organization. All right, a couple quick questions. We have to do these quickly in the spirit of time. And I know there are a lot of choices. Which quadrant, A, B, C, D, represents a readiness to change? So think about it as positive and high, positive and low, negative and high, negative and low. Yeah, but yeah. As soon as I open my mouth, things change. I'm not gonna open my mouth. Yeah, and I'll talk more about the subtlety of this in a second. It's some combination of B, C, or B and C. Right? My personal view on it is a readiness to change is B. I am proactive about it. Think about these as the change champions. I'm in it with you, right? I'm ready to go. That's where that is. Where might you misinterpret somebody's readiness and acceptance to change? Let me help you. You're not likely to misinterpret it here. because they're on the same wavelength as you. They're giving you positive messages. You're not going to misinterpret these because they're going to fight with you. They're going to argue with you. They're going to call you stupid. They're going to do anything to stand in your way. It's these people who are, they're going like this. Yeah, nice. Keep going. Keep going. But they're not doing anything. You don't know if inside that little thought bubble, they're saying this person is the dumbest person on the face of the earth. And there's no way I'm going to do what they want because they're sitting there politely nodding. Used to have somebody who worked for me who called that the head fake. They'd go like this, and inside they were going, not on your life, right? Because there are no signals. These signals are clear up here. There are no real signals down here. I think somebody just put something in the chat box. Yeah, oh yeah. These are those shades of gray, right? So I'm trying it's while I can't categorically tell you, no, unless you said A, it's completely wrong. I'm trying to tell you that here's why A is probably the best answer, right? But if we had this as a conversation, I'd say, okay, Priyanka, so tell me why you thought C and B were better than B or C alone, right? And then we'd have that as a conversation. Yeah. Okay. That's acceptance of change. We're going the wrong way here. Where am I misinterpreting? Yep. I don't know why of course, as I'm running up against time and there we go. Which quadrants where would it be the easiest to misinterpret behaviors, period, whether they're positive or negative? J, right? The key word is misinterpret, right? You're giving me so few signals, I don't know how to react. It's down here, low activation. These are clear signals. These are very fuzzy signals. These happen to be fuzzy, maybe negative. These happen to be fuzzy, maybe these people are going, this is boring, right? But these people are going, yeah, like that. What does that mean? You don't know, right? Here's the hard one. Where are you going to get the most constructive feedback? My silence suggests I'm still waiting for the most appropriate answer. It's not these people are not giving you constructive feedback. They're saying just keep doing what you're doing. I like it. Keep doing it. That's not constructive, right? That's rah rah rah. Keep doing the same thing you're doing. These are the people, if you're listening carefully, are giving you the most constructive feedback because they're the ones who are telling you this is what I am uncomfortable with. This is what I don't like. This is what I'd like to see differently. And the idea here is this is why you're understanding your own response to change, whether you're resistant or proactive, is important because if you can't overcome this resistance, right? If people are that uncomfortable with it, your only real choice is to change the change. You have to change the approach, right? Because you can't just force it through the organization, right? So these people are the ones who are, if you're listening to it and you're in tune to it, they're the ones giving you the constructive feedback. All right, change champions are here. I'll give you the answer. It's B. These are your change champions. By definition, champions are active. They're doing it for you. They're doing with you. It's B, high activation and positive. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to talk about this, but I'll give it to you as a tool to keep in your toolbox. This framework, if you remember from strategy, you learned the business model canvas, Osterwalder's business model canvas, and you learned the lean startup canvas. Well, here's a very similar canvas for leading change. Let me blow it up for you. The first steps are understanding the context, the broader context. The steps, and you start with what's my purpose, obviously. You understand what the context is, you understand who the players are, what the politics are, and you develop your strategy for leading it. So it's a great framework to take, and that not just to have in your back pocket, but to actually populate and use it almost like a scorecard to say, where am I going and how am I doing? All right. All right. I want to wrap up by talking about automation and the future of work. Since you did the breakout on AI, well, let's talk a little bit more about it because it's not going away. Right. So there's a McKinsey study, 60% of all occupations globally will have at least 30% of their activities that are already automatable based on existing technology. And this study is about 2 years old. So you know these numbers have gone up from there. 50% of the world economy, right? The World Economic Forum estimates 70 million new jobs with about, I think it's about 20 million jobs that are eliminated or displaced. So it's a little bit on all sides, right? So when you think about it, you think about who are the stakeholders who could be impacted by this kind of change. Again, in the spirit of time, your immediate response would be, well, obviously it's the workers. We're talking about the future of work. It's the workers. Well, yeah, it certainly is, but that's not all. Right? Anybody, why would I be so adamant about now the A, that was obvious, and B, not, and why not other people? Or who else might be a stakeholder? Employers are obvious stakeholders. What about educational systems? What about governments? What's the government responsibility to all displaced workers? Is there a responsibility to all displaced workers? How do universities prepare students for the future of work? They become stakeholders in this, right? And it goes way beyond that, right? So when you think about stakeholders, think carefully about who can either impact what is happening or who will be impacted by it directly by it, right? So here's some data. It's a Goldman Sachs study that shows the impact of AI on the future of work. And the color coding is the navy blue is basically low to no to low automation. The light blue is up to 50% augmentation, complementarity. And the gray is 50% all the way up to replacement, right? And what you see is across all industries, for what that's worth, if that means anything, you see a lot of complementarity, right? Now you see the extremes of building, what's that, building and grounds maintenance and cleaning. It's not that they can't be automated. It may not be economically feasible to have them automated, right? If you've got low paying jobs and the cost of automation is high, it doesn't make sense to automate it from a business perspective, right? It's no ROI. So that may explain part of this. But what I want you to look at is if you look at computer and mathematical, you've got complete complementarity, meaning our jobs won't be replaced, but some aspects, some tasks of our jobs will be automated. So we'll be working with AI. It's not that AI won't will take our jobs. It's we have to figure out how to best use AI in a productive way. We'll talk a lot more about this when we get to digital transformation in a couple of weeks, but just take it as a given. A couple more data facts, and then I'll ask you a question to think about. This is the World Economic Forum, by the way, Future of Jobs. This was just released, 2025. This 2025 report. So here's the great news, right? So if you're not particularly happy about that, here's the good news. The top fastest growing jobs: big data specialists, engineers, machine learning specialists, app developers, data warehouse, analytics is in here, data analytics and data scientists among the top growing jobs. But what that really means is they will go to people who know how to use AI, not necessarily how to build AI, but how to use AI in their job. Right? Now, the other part of this study, which relates to that, is an ugly graph. I didn't make it. This is right from the World Economic Forum. The horizontal is share of employers who consider these skills, all these listed skills, as core skills in 2025. Right? And obviously, the further to the right you go, the more companies consider these core skills. And then the vertical is employers expecting increasing skills in use by 2030. So this top box are core skills that are required 5 years from now, and not a long time, right? 4.5 years from now, to be exact. And what I want you to look at, I'm not going to read all these dots to you, but I will tell you that 9 of these 12 dots are not technical skills. Analytical thinking, creative thinking, technology literacy, systems thinking, self-awareness, empathy. This whole course is based on empathy. Start with what is motivating the other person? And how do I influence that? Right? That's why that complementarity becomes so important, because you're not going to compete on cleaning data. You can compete, you can excel at creative thinking, analytical thinking, empathic thinking, things like that. Yeah. All right. So this is the McKinsey study again. Collecting data, processing data, things we do. These are the most susceptible activities, 50%. Right? If you think about that data janitorial work, the data wrangling, et cetera, cleansing, wrangling, being 70% of an analytics project, it's automatable. It's already automatable. So you focus on tasks that involve uniquely human skills: creativity, problem solving, people management, stakeholder management, things like that. That's not automatable, at least now. Right? So I should have tried to change the slide while I was, there we go. It's got to load. The video is going to load. It's Jensen Huang, in case you don't know. And the title itself is provocative enough, right? But let's just listen.
Build a website you love.
Okay, let's listen to the
with
ad.
Wix. For your words,
Jensen Huang, co-founder and CEO.
Okay, let me just.
Something, and it's going to sound completely opposite of what people feel. You probably recall over the course of the last 10 years, 15 years, almost everybody who sits on a stage like this would tell you it is vital that your children learn computer science. Everybody should learn how to program. And in fact, it's almost exactly the opposite. It is our job to create computing technology such that nobody has to program.
Jarvis, you up?
And that the programming language is human.
At Symflin's, a full-service agency.
Okay, we don't need to listen to that anyway. So the key though is, what do you focus on? You focus a lot on the domain, right? On the domain of the area that you're going to impact, so that you become a subject matter expert in that domain, and you know the applicability of AI. Now, excuse me, if your goal is to build AI systems, what he said is obviously not relevant to you. If your goal is to work in an organizational setting that is going to benefit from the use of AI, then what he said is very
I'm a
relevant.
co-founder.
Yeah,
We're in a
okay.
close relationship with NVIDIA. And later in this video, I will include
I
a clip
can't-
of what Jensen
I can't
said
get out of it
people
now.
should study, which is also
Okay, so let me just do it this way. So here's Matt Garman's take on the same thing. All right, Matt Garman, CEO of Amazon Web Services. Everyone is a programmer, right? It's not, so programming itself is not an end. Much like I said about technology enables change, it is not the driver of change, right? So to Matt Garman, the question is, how do I innovate using those skills, right? How do I build something for my customer? And what he's encouraging, this was not a threatening, this was more of a coaching conversation with his team. How do I actually understand better what my customer needs or customers need, and then use my skills to fulfill that, right? As opposed to, I am a programmer, I'm a developer. All right, and the reason for that is, again, remember back to strategy, one of the frameworks for understanding strategy was this no resource view, right? Resources have to be valuable, rare, inimitable, you can't imitate them, and not substitutable, right? So AI per se is not a competitive advantage. It is valuable, it's not rare, it's not inimitable, and it's substitutable. So what creates the competitive advantage is us and how we're using AI, right? Not the technology per se. It is now democratized, right? How do we take advantage of that? What's our creativity? What's our curiosity to actually use it to find new ways of working, new ways of connecting with our customers? So this is where we'll end. And I'll pick up, I have 2 more slides, but it's already past 8, so I'll pick up on those next week. But I'll end with this poll. I wonder how you feel about it. And I want to give you all a chance to respond to it. And I'm not going to comment on your responses, but I just want you to do a little soul searching for a minute and say how you feel about it. So the first thing I'll say is thank you for the honesty to say, I don't know. I feel a little stressed, a little bit worried about this. Because the politically correct thing to say is, yeah, I'm all in. I'm ready to conquer the world. And if that's how you feel, I'm not saying don't say it. If that's how you feel, that's terrific. We're going to explore this a little bit further next week. So I normally don't do this, but I'm going to lock the poll for the simple reason that I need to take a screenshot of that, and I can't do that while I'm talking to you. So I'm going to lock that, and we'll come back to it next week. I'll skip those last 2 slides. Your first assignment is due on October 5th, so you've still got a couple of weeks. It's more of a knowledge check than it is not, let me rephrase that. It's a knowledge check. It's not a case study. So it's going to cover the concepts that we dealt with through module 4 through next week. So it's not even open for you to do yet. Next week, we're going to talk about actually leading change. What is it that you do as a change agent to lead change? Okay? Questions, comments? No? We're good? All right. Thanks, everybody. Can we get an access to it before the 20th? Just to, we can get an access to the assignment as soon as we talk about it on Monday. Let me look at it first, and then I'll, if I can open it, I'll send you all a an announcement. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good evening and have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.